They called him Your Highness, a prince born to unimaginable wealth, destined for a crown. Yet in the suffocating silence of his gilded cage, Alexander knew a truth that chilled him to the bone. He was the poorest man in his own kingdom. "No more!" The whisper escaped him, raw and final. "I choose oblivion. I choose to be no one." What drives a man who has everything to cast it all aside, to trade a palace for poverty, a royal title for the anonymity of a delivery man? And what happens when this desperate search for real love, built on a dangerous lie, begins to shatter? Could such a deception ever lead to an honest heart? We're dying to know what you think. Share your first impressions in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of Prince Alexander's perilous journey. In the gilded cage of the Ethelberg royal palace, Prince Alexander, heir to a fortune that could bend nations, often found himself the loneliest man in any crowded room. Each smile directed his way felt like a transaction, every laugh a carefully calibrated audition. At 32, his life was a tapestry woven with threads of immense privilege and suffocating expectation. The crown was a heavy weight, not just on his head during ceremonial duties, but on his heart every single day. He'd learned early on that his title and his billions were a dazzling, impenetrable barrier between him and anything resembling genuine human connection. Love in its purest form seemed a fairy tale, spun for commoners, not for princes, whose every acquaintance was scrutinized for motive. There had been a woman years ago, before the relentless glare of his impending royal duties had intensified. He'd believed for a fleeting, beautiful season that she saw him. Alexander, the man who loved old books and quiet dawns, not the prince. But the illusion had shattered, as most illusions do under the weight of expectation and the subtle corrosive influence of courtiers who whispered of suitability and lineage. The scar it left was a tender, persistent ache, a reminder of what he yearned for and what it seemed he could never truly possess. His only real confidant was Ben, a friend from his university days, a man whose laughter was genuine and whose counsel, though often irreverently delivered, was always sincere. Ben was a successful architect now, his life a testament to talent, a world away from the stifling protocols of Alexander's existence. One crisp autumn evening, overlooking the sprawling, manicured palace gardens from a private balcony, Alexander finally voiced the desolation that had been hollowing him out. "I'm tired of it, Ben," he said, his voice low, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Tired of the masks, the pretense. I'd give half my kingdom for one honest conversation, one look that isn't clouded by what I represent." Ben leaned against the balustrade, his expression unusually serious. "So what are you going to do about it? Alex abdicate and join a monastery?" Alexander managed a wry smile. Tempting. "But no, I have a rather more unconventional idea." He paused, then laid it out, his plan to shed his royal skin to disappear for a while into the anonymity of ordinary life. "I want to be just a man, Ben. To see if anyone anywhere could care for someone, Tara, Avergal, who has nothing to offer but himself." Ben listened, his initial shock giving way to a thoughtful frown. "You mean go full Prince and the Pauper? Alex, that's ambitious and potentially disastrous. You scrubbing floors. You once complained your caviar was a degree too cold." "I'll learn," Alexander insisted, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "I have to. I'll get a job, a real job. Live simply. I need to know if real love is even possible for me, or if I'm destined to be a beautifully adorned figurehead." He looked at his friend, his gaze imploring. "I was thinking, a delivery man, No one looks twice at a delivery man. Ben let out a slow whistle. A delivery man. You Prince Alexander of Ethelberg, wrestling with a greasy delivery bike and cheap takeout containers. You're serious, he saw the resolve in Alexander's face. All right, you lunatic. If you're truly set on this, I'll help you. But you owe me big time. And I get to choose your pauper wardrobe. Something truly unprincely. A mischievous glint appeared in Ben's eyes. You sure you can tell the difference between dish soap and shampoo? Alexander chuckled a genuine laugh that felt like a small release. I'll manage. The alias will be Daniel. Daniel Miller. And nobody, absolutely nobody can know. A week later, Daniel Miller stood awkwardly in the bustling kitchen of Ben's Bistro, a popular eatery Ben owned, near the sprawling Golden Hills University campus. He was dressed in faded jeans and a nondescript T-shirt Ben had triumphantly produced a far cry from his tailored Savile Row suits. The cheap cologne Ben had insisted upon made his nose itch. His first task learn the delivery routes. His chariot, a sputtering ancient motorbike that looked like it had survived several wars. As he waited for his first batch of orders, the small television in the corner of the staff break room was on-tuned to a sports channel. A news anchor was enthusiastically reporting, and in stunning tennis news, Alexander Bublik has just clinched the Piemonte Open title. This victory catapults the Kazakhstani star into the Roland Garros quarterfinals for 2025, a career-best performance that has the tennis world buzzing. At a small table in the adjoining cafe section, Sophia Miller, a student nursing a cup of herbal tea and a stack of textbooks, glanced up at the screen. A gentle smile touched her lips. She murmured to her friend across the table, her voice soft but clear enough for Daniel to overhear as he passed by. He's so resilient, isn't he? Sometimes success comes from all the quiet effort no one ever gets to see. Daniel paused for a fraction of a second, an unknown emotion stirring within him at her words, at the unaffected sincerity in her voice. He didn't know her, but her observation resonated deeply with his current silent endeavor. His first few deliveries were a comedy of errors. He fumbled with the insulated bags, nearly dropped a large pizza, and got lost twice, despite Ben's carefully marked map. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. Actual unglamorous sweat from exertion, not from a climate-controlled gym. It was humbling and, in a strange way, exhilarating. He was invisible, just another cog in the city's great machine. Late in the afternoon, with one last delivery for the day, Daniel navigated the winding paths of Golden Hills University. The recipient was a student named Olivia Prescott in one of the more upscale dormitories. He found the room and knocked. The door swung open to reveal a young woman whose beauty was as striking as the disdain in her eyes. Olivia Prescott appraised him from head to toe, her perfectly sculpted nose wrinkling slightly. "You're late," she snapped, her voice sharp and imperious. Daniel, taken aback by her abruptness, managed a polite, "My apologies, ma'am. Traffic was heavy. Here is your order from Ben's Bistro." Olivia barely glanced at the food bags he extended. Her gaze lingered on his worn T-shirt and the cheap cap Ben had insisted he wear. "Ugh, what is that smell?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. "Is that you? Honestly, do they just hire anyone these days? You look like you slept in a dumpster." She took the bags from him, with a look of profound distaste, as if touching them might contaminate her. "And try to be a little more presentable next time. If there is a next time for you." Daniel stood there momentarily stunned into silence. The casual cruelty of her words, the way she dismissed him as less than human, struck him with a force he hadn't anticipated. This was the reality he had sought, unfiltered and raw. He was no longer Prince Alexander, shielded by layers of deference and respect. He was Daniel the delivery man, and to Olivia Prescott, he was nothing. A wave of emotions washed over him, shock, a sharp sting of humiliation, and a deeper, colder understanding of the world he had just stepped into. He simply nodded, unable to find his voice, and turned away the encounter, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth and a heavy weight in his heart. This, he thought, was only the beginning. The sting of Olivia Prescott's disdain lingered long after Daniel had guided the sputtering motorbike away from the upscale dormitory. It wasn't just the words, it was the casualness of her cruelty, the entitled assumption that he, a mere delivery man, existed on a plane so far beneath hers as to be almost invisible or worse, an irritation. Each rude encounter, each dismissive gesture he experienced over the next few days chipped away at the protective shell Prince Alexander had built around himself over years. Yet paradoxically, each chip also let in a sliver of raw, unfiltered reality that was both jarring and, in a strange way, invigorating. He learned quickly that life outside the palace walls was a relentless series of small, sharp lessons. He discovered the peculiar ache in muscles he hadn't known he possessed after a long day of deliveries. He learned that a $5 bill could mean the difference between a hot meal and a hungry evening, a concept so alien to his former life, it felt like a dispatch from another planet. One afternoon, attempting to buy a cheap umbrella from a street vendor, as a sudden downpour threatened, he tried to haggle, remembering something Ben had once joked about. His princely attempt at bargaining was so inept, a polite, hesitant query about a possible fractional discount, that the vendor, a robust woman with a no-nonsense gaze, first looked bewildered, then burst into hearty laughter. Fractional discount, love, she'd boomed. You just pay the price, or get wet, he'd ended up paying a blush. Conceitos abstratos, de manera mais concreta, irrelacionável como leitor. Sophia Miller, unbeknownst to him, had witnessed that particular exchange from the doorway of a nearby bookstore where she'd taken refuge from the rain. A smile played on her lips as she watched the earnest, slightly lost-looking delivery man in his perpetually damp-looking cap. There was something endearing about his awkwardness, a stark contrast to the usual brusque efficiency of most delivery personnel. His encounters with Olivia Prescott unfortunately became a recurring feature of his new life, as she was a frequent customer of Ben's Bistro. Each delivery to her room was an exercise in self-control. She never tipped, rarely made eye contact, and often found something to complain about. The food was tepid, the packaging unsanitary, his arrival glacially slow. Once he overheard her on the phone as he waited for her to sign the receipt, her voice dripping with exasperation. "Mother, I know the charity gala is important, but must I really be seen with young Lord Ashworth? He has the conversational skills of a damp sponge. Yes, I understand a strategic alliance. Fine." It was a brief, unguarded glimpse into her own gilded cage, hinting at pressures that perhaps shaped her abrasive exterior. But whatever her reasons, her rudeness was a constant, unpleasant reminder of the very attitudes he had sought to escape. The irony that he, a prince, was being lectured on presentation by someone like Olivia was not lost on him, though the humor was decidedly bitter. It was a few days later, under a sky finally clear of rain, that he formally met Sophia. He was making a delivery to the university library, a place he found himself increasingly drawn to. During his breaks, its quiet hum a balm to his frayed nerves. As he was leaving, he saw her struggling with an armful of books and a precariously balanced art portfolio. One large art history tome slipped, and Daniel, reacting instinctively, lunged forward and caught it just inches from the ground. Oh, thank you so much," Sophia exclaimed, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink. Her eyes, a warm hazel, met his, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alexander saw a gaze devoid of calculation or expectation. It was just open, kind. "You're welcome," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He handed the heavy book back to her. "That was a close call. It certainly was." She laughed, a light, musical sound. "My entire semester's work is in that portfolio. I'd be lost without it." She adjusted her load. "I'm Sophia, by the way. Sophia Miller." "Daniel," he replied, offering a small, almost hesitant smile. "Daniel Miller. I deliver for Ben's Bistro." "Oh, Ben's. Their spicy chicken wraps are lifesavers during late-night study sessions," she said, her smile widening. "It's nice to finally meet one of their delivery heroes." She had a way of speaking that was both gentle and direct, and he found himself relaxing in her presence. He noticed a smudge of charcoal on her cheekbone, a testament to her artistic pursuits, and an absurd urge to gently wipe it away pricked at him. They chatted for a few minutes, an easy, unforced conversation about the university, the surprisingly good campus coffee, and the challenges of juggling studies, and, in her case, a part-time job at a local community center, teaching art to children. "It doesn't pay much," she admitted with a shrug, "but seeing their faces light up when they create something. That's the real currency." He found himself listening intently, fascinated by her quiet passion, her lack of pretense. Here was someone who found richness in things other than material wealth, someone who understood the value of quiet effort. As they were about to part ways, Sophia glanced at his motorbike, then back at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know Daniel?" She began, a slight, curious tilt to her head. "For a delivery guy, you have surprisingly soft hands. And you speak, well, you have a very precise way of speaking. Almost like—" She paused, searching for the word, a tiny frown appearing between her brows. "Like an academic or someone who reads a lot of old-fashioned novels." Alexander's heart gave a sudden sharp jolt. He felt a flush creep up his neck. He'd been so careful, so conscious of his speech, his mannerisms. Had he slipped up, he quickly tucked his hands into his pockets, offering a self-deprecating chuckle he hoped sounded convincing. "Ah, well, my mother was an English teacher." He improvised the lie, feeling clumsy on his tongue. "She always insisted on proper grammar, even when I was just asking for more ketchup." Sophia's brow cleared, and she laughed. "That explains it then. A formidable woman, I imagine." "You have no idea," Daniel said, relief making his smile more genuine this time. "Well, thank you again, Daniel." Sophia said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Maybe I'll see you around Ben's, or on another heroic book-saving mission." "I hope so," he replied, the words coming out with more warmth than he'd intended. He watched her walk into the library, the heavy art portfolio clutched zashisheno, rukою від udaru або пошкодження. A sense of lightness, something he hadn't felt since embarking on this charade, settled over him. Sophia Miller. She was a small, unexpected beacon in the otherwise grey landscape of his new existence. But her innocent observation about his hands, his speech, served as a stark reminder. He was walking a tightrope, and the fall, if it came, would be a long way down. The world of Prince Alexander and the world of Daniel Miller were separated by more than just circumstance. They were separated by a chasm of truth he wasn't sure he could ever bridge. The unlikely friendship between Daniel Miller, the quiet delivery man, and Sophia Miller, the kind-hearted art student, blossomed in the unassuming corners of the university campus. It began with shared smiles during his deliveries, then brief impromptu conversations by the library steps or near the bustling student union. Sophia, with her genuine warmth and perceptive nature, seemed to look right past Daniel's worn clothes and tired motorbike, seeing instead a man with thoughtful eyes and a surprisingly gentle demeanor. Daniel, or rather Alexander, found himself anticipating these encounters with an eagerness that was entirely new to him. Sophia spoke of her art, her dreams of one day using her skills to create beautiful public murals that could bring a little joy into everyday lives. She talked about the children she taught at the community center, her face lighting up as she described their uninhibited creativity. He in turn found himself sharing carefully edited snippets of Daniel's supposed past, a quiet upbringing, a love for history, a fabricated fondness for long solitary walks. Each shared confidence, however small, felt like a precious, fragile thing. One sunny afternoon, as Daniel delivered a catering order for a small faculty gathering near the art department, Sophia spotted him. "Daniel," she called out, waving him over to a shaded bench where she was sketching. Perfect timing. I was just about to take a break. Care to join me for the most gourmet meal a student budget can buy? She grinned, gesturing to a paper bag beside her, a $5 footlong and a shared soda. Alexander's heart did a familiar lurch. A date, however informal, was the last thing he'd expected, yet the invitation felt as natural and unpretentious as Sophia herself. "I'd be honored," he said, trying to match her light tone, though a current of something far deeper hummed beneath his words. They sat on the bench, the sounds of the campus a distant murmur. Sophia unwrapped the sandwich with an almost ceremonial flourish. As they ate, she'd occasionally glance at his face, a small, curious smile playing on her lips. Once, as he was describing a fictional camping trip Daniel had supposedly taken, he used the term glamping, then immediately corrected himself to just, regular camping. In a tent. Sophia chuckled. "You know, Daniel, for a guy who supposedly roughed it in the woods, you have a very specific way of holding your half of the sandwich. Almost daintily." She wasn't mocking, just observing her eyes full of amusement. "And you flinched when that pigeon landed a bit too close. Not exactly Grizzly Adams, are you?" He felt his ears burn. "Pigeons can be surprisingly aggressive," he mumbled, taking a large bite of his sandwich to avoid further comment. These little slips were becoming more frequent, these tiny betrayals of his carefully constructed persona. Sophia thankfully seemed to find them more endearing than suspicious, attributing them to a certain charming eccentricity. "You're a man of hidden depths and surprising quirks, Daniel Miller," she'd said once, shaking her head with a smile. "It's what makes you interesting." Interesting? Prince Alexander had been called many things, powerful, influential, eligible. But interesting, in this simple, human way, felt like a far greater compliment. However, his growing closeness to Sophia did not go unnoticed. Olivia Prescott, whose path seemed to cross Daniel's with an uncanny and unwelcome regularity, often saw them chatting. Her expression whenever she caught sight of them together was a mixture of bafflement and thinly veiled contempt. That he, the smelly delivery boy she'd so thoroughly dismissed, could be the recipient of Sophia Miller's warm smiles and easy laughter seemed to offend her on a fundamental level. One afternoon, as Daniel and Sophia were sharing a coffee at an outdoor campus table, Olivia sauntered past, flanked by two equally disdainful-looking friends. She paused, letting her gaze drift over Daniel with exaggerated distaste before settling on Sophia. "Sophia, darling," she cooed, her voice laced with saccharine condescension. "I didn't realize your standards for companionship had become so inclusive." Her eyes flicked back to Daniel, "Still gracing us with your fragrant presence, delivery boy." Before Daniel could even register the insult, Sophia's demeanor, usually so gentle, sharpened. "Olivia," she said, her voice calm but firm, "Daniel is my friend, and I'd appreciate it If you showed him the same courtesy you'd expect for yourself, though I imagine that might be a novel concept for you. Olivia's perfectly painted lips thinned. Friends? How quaint. She gave a dismissive little laugh and swept away her friends, snickering in her wake. Daniel looked at Sophia, a mixture of gratitude and concern in his eyes. You didn't have to do that, Sophia. She's not worth the trouble. Sophia met his gaze, her own unwavering. No one deserves to be treated like that, Daniel, least of all by someone like her. Her loyalty so freely given both warmed him and twisted the knot of guilt in his stomach a little tighter. The complexities of his double life were further highlighted by an unexpected visit from Ben. His friend had called, announcing he was in the neighborhood and wanted to inspect the royal progress in the realm of fast food delivery. They met at a discreet, out-of-the-way diner. Ben, true to his word, had brought a care package that included, among other things, a bar of eye-wateringly expensive Swiss chocolate and a new, slightly less offensive brand of cheap deodorant. So Ben began, after ordering them both a large plate of fries. How goes the noble experiment, O Prince of Pizzas? Duke of Deliveries. Daniel recounted his experiences, the good and the bad, his voice softening when he spoke of Sophia. Ben listened intently, his usual mirth tempered with concern. She sounds special, Alex. He used the prince's real name softly, a reminder of the world Alexander had temporarily left behind. But this whole charade, it's a house of cards. What happens when she finds out Daniel Miller, the quirky, history-loving delivery man, is actually His Royal Highness Alexander of Ethelberg, with a GDP larger than some small countries, I don't know. Alexander admitted the weight of his deception, pressing down on him. I try not to think that far ahead. Right now with her, I just feel real. Real how Ben munched on a fry. Just be careful, mate. The higher you build this, the harder it falls. And from what you're telling me, Sophia isn't the type to appreciate being played no matter how noble your intentions. He then lightened the mood. On the plus side, your French fry eating technique has definitely become less regal. You're practically a commoner now. Almost. Alexander threw a napkin at him, a genuine smile finally breaking through his worry. Ben's visit, a brief portal back to his other life, was both a comfort and a stark reminder of the precariousness of his situation. Meanwhile, Olivia Prescott was stewing. Sophia's quiet defense of the delivery boy had been a public rebuke, and Olivia did not take kindly to being challenged, especially by someone she considered so far beneath her. The image of them together sharing laughter gnawed at her. It wasn't just about Daniel. It was about Sophia, who, despite her simple clothes and lack of obvious connections, possessed a quiet confidence and an infuriating self-possession that Olivia, for all her wealth and status, seemed to lack. That evening, Olivia sat in her expensively furnished dorm room, a scowl marring her pretty features. Daniel was an insignificance. Sophia, however, Sophia was an affront, a smug, self-righteous nobody who needed to be put in her place. A slow, malicious smile began to spread across Olivia's face. An idea, vague at first, then sharpening with an ugly clarity, began to form. Yes, she thought it was time Sophia Miller learned a lesson about meddling with her superiors, and it would be a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Olivia Prescott was not accustomed to being defied, nor to feeling overshadowed. Sophia Miller, with her quiet grace and the inexplicable attention she received from that delivery boy, Daniel had become a burr under Olivia's meticulously crafted designer saddle. Her mother, Mrs. Eleanor Prescott, had also expressed her concerns. Darling Mrs. Prescott had said, her voice like chilled champagne over the phone, one must cultivate relationships that enhance one's standing. This, fraternizing with the hired help and encouraging your little friend to do the same is hardly strategic. Young Lord Ashworth was asking after you again, by the way. Do try to be accommodating." The implied criticism, coupled with her own simmering resentment, solidified Olivia's resolve. Sophia Miller needed to be taught a lesson, one that would remove her from Olivia's orbit and perhaps from Golden Hills University altogether. Her plan when it formed was both malicious and cunningly simple. A week later, the university's art department was in an uproar. A valuable antique silver locket, a cherished heirloom on loan from a faculty member for a still-life drawing class, had vanished from a supposedly secure display case. Whispers turned into accusations, and soon a distraught Sophia Miller found herself the primary suspect. Olivia, with feigned reluctance, recalled seeing Sophia lingering near the display case after hours looking a bit shifty. Another of Olivia's coterie remembered Sophia admiring the locket with an unusual intensity. The evidence was circumstantial, flimsy, yet in the cloistered, gossip-prone environment of the university, it was enough to cast a dark shadow. Daniel heard the news first from a distraught fellow delivery driver who also took classes part-time. "They're saying that girl Sophia, the quiet one from the art program, they think she swiped Professor Albright's locket." A cold dread seized Alexander. Sophia, a thief. It was ludicrous, impossible. He knew with an unshakable certainty that transcended logic that she was incapable of such a thing. He found her later that day, near the campus fountain, her usually bright face pale and tear-streaked, her shoulders slumped in despair. They searched my locker, Daniel," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "And my dorm room. They didn't find anything, of course, because I didn't take it. But everyone's looking at me, like I'm a criminal." She buried her face in her hands. "Professor Albright was so kind to me. How could they think?" Daniel sat beside her, his heart aching with a furious helplessness. As Daniel the delivery man, what could he do? Offer a sympathetic ear, testify to her good character. His word would mean nothing against the insidious whispers orchestrated by Olivia. He tried, of course. He spoke to Ben, who knew some of the university administrators through his catering business. Ben made a few calls, expressed his own belief in Sophia's integrity, but the tide of suspicion once turned was hard to reverse. Daniel even tried to talk to the campus security chief, a gruff, overworked man who listened with half an ear, and then essentially told the delivery boy to mind his own business. The sheer impotence of his situation was a fresh kind of torment for Prince Alexander. He who could summon armies and command fortunes could not even lift this unjust burden from the shoulders of the woman he was steadily, irrevocably falling in love with. The university, under pressure and eager to resolve the scandal, convened a disciplinary hearing. Sophia faced suspension, possibly even expulsion, and a police report if the locket wasn't found and the suspicion against her wasn't cleared. That night, Alexander paced his modest rented room, a stark contrast to his opulent palace chambers like a caged tiger. The pretense the game he had so carefully constructed suddenly felt like a suffocating trap. He could not let this happen. He would not. The decision, when it came, was swift and absolute. To hell with the anonymity, to hell with the experiment, if it meant Sophia suffered for a crime she didn't commit. He couldn't reveal himself, not yet, not like this. It would create a different kind of chaos. But Prince Alexander had resources, a network of discreet professionals who owed him their loyalty and operated in shadows deeper than any Olivia Prescott could conjure. He made a single encrypted call from a burner phone he'd acquired for just such an unforeseen emergency. His instructions were precise, urgent, and carried the unmistakable weight of royal command. "I want to know everything about the disappearance of a silver locket from Golden Hills University's art department." He stated, his voice, devoid of its usual princely cadence, replaced by a steely resolve. "And I want the truth uncovered. Immediately. Discretion is paramount." Within 24 hours, things began to shift with astonishing speed. An anonymous tip, complete with grainy security footage from a previously overlooked camera angle, was delivered to the university's head of security and the local police precinct. The footage clearly showed another student, one of Olivia's less intelligent acolytes, nervously pocketing the locket during a moment when the display case had been briefly left unattended for cleaning. Further discreet inquiries by Alexander's team revealed the student had a gambling problem and had been pressured by Olivia, who had promised to cover his debts, to steal the locket and plant suspicion on Sophia. Olivia's motive, it seemed, was a potent cocktail of jealousy and a desire to eliminate a perceived rival for social superiority. The locket was found in the guilty student's possession. His confession was swift and complete, implicating Olivia as the mastermind. Sophia was summoned to the dean's office, expecting the worst. Instead, she was met with profuse apologies. The dean, looking flustered and more than a little intimidated, spoke of new evidence and a thorough reinvestigation that had completely exonerated her. He mentioned in hushed tones that certain very influential parties had taken a keen interest in ensuring justice was swiftly served, even hinting that the prince's own office had made inquiries regarding the university's handling of the matter, expressing a desire for fairness and integrity in their proceedings. Sophia walked out of the dean's office. In a daze, the weight of the world lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a profound sense of bewildered gratitude. Who had this kind of influence? And why would they use it for her? A struggling art student, later that evening, as she sat in her small dorm room, trying to process the whirlwind of the past few days, a university messenger arrived. He bore a single cream-colored envelope, thick and expensive, sealed with an unfamiliar elegant crest. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, on heavy cardstock, was an invitation, its script an ornate dance of calligraphy. His Royal Highness Prince Alexander of Ethelberg requests the pleasure of Miss Sophia Miller's company at the annual Royal Charity Ball, to be held at the Ethelberg Palace. Sophia stared at the invitation, her heart pounding against her ribs. Prince Alexander, the reclusive, almost mythical ruler of their country, why on earth would he invite her? And how did this connect, if at all, to the influential parties who had cleared her name? A thrilling, terrifying suspicion began to bloom in her mind, too wild, too improbable to fully grasp. She sank onto her bed, the invitation clutched in her hand, a maelstrom of questions swirling around her. The cream-colored invitation felt like a paradox in Sophia's hands, an object of immense prestige that had somehow found its way into her humble student life. The Royal Charity Ball, Prince Alexander. It was all too surreal. A part of her, the sensible, pragmatic part, urged her to politely decline. What business did she, Sophia Miller, have in such an opulent world? But a stronger, more insistent voice, fueled by a potent mix of curiosity and an inexplicable sense of destiny, whispered that she had to go. She needed to understand who had intervened on her behalf, and this invitation felt like the only clue. When she tentatively mentioned it to Daniel, a tremor of nervousness in her voice, he listened quietly, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Sophia, that's incredible," he said, and she noted a strange intensity in his eyes. "You absolutely have to go. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "But Daniel, what would I even wear?" she'd lamented. "I don't own anything remotely suitable for a palace." He'd waved a dismissive hand, a gesture so uncharacteristically grand for Daniel that it gave her a momentary pause. "Don't worry about that. I have a friend. Ben. He knows people. He can help you find something perfect. Something that will let you shine, not just the dress." True to his word, a few days later, a simple, elegant gown of deep sapphire blue arrived, delivered by a discreet courier. It wasn't ostentatious, but it fit her perfectly and seemed to capture the very color of a twilight sky. With it was a small handwritten note. "Sophia, may your evening be as beautiful as your spirit. A friend." She suspected Daniel, or perhaps his well-connected friend Ben, was behind it, and her heart warmed at the quiet thoughtfulness. The night of the Royal Charity Ball arrived, a glittering affair that drew the cream of Ethelberg society and international dignitaries. The Ethelberg Palace was a breathtaking spectacle of lights, music, and history. Marble halls gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air buzzed with a potent mix of power, wealth, and artifice. Sophia, feeling like an imposter in her borrowed elegance, clutched her small handbag tightly, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped into the grand ballroom. It was a world away from her art studio, her quiet evenings with books, her shared sandwiches with Daniel on a campus bench. She saw them almost immediately, Olivia Prescott and her mother Eleanor. They were holding court near a towering ice sculpture, Olivia resplendent in a sequined gown that shrieked expense, Mrs. Prescott a vision of steely aristocratic composure. Olivia's eyes swept over Sophia first with a flicker of non-recognition, then widening in disbelief, followed by a sneer that Sophia felt like a physical blow. "Well, well," Olivia drawled loud enough for those nearby to hear as Sophia passed. "Look what the cat dragged in. Or should I say, what charity case the palace decided to pity tonight." Sophia's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin, remembering Daniel's quiet encouragement, remembering her own worth. She offered a polite, cool nod and moved further into the ballroom, trying to find a quiet corner to collect herself. Then a hush fell over the assembled guests. A wave of anticipation rippled through the room. At the top of the grand staircase, flanked by liveried attendants, a figure appeared. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a formal evening suit that spoke of understated power rather than ostentation. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his features noble, his bearing regal. As he began his descent, a confident, almost predatory grace in his movements, Sophia's heart stopped. Her blood turned to ice. Her breath hitched. The ornate ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the murmuring crowd. It all receded into a dizzying blur. There was only him, the man on the staircase, the man whose eyes, now sweeping across the room with a familiar intensity, were an exact match to... No, it couldn't be. Prince Alexander reached the foot of the stairs, and the crowd parted respectfully before him. He exchanged a few words with a dignitary, his smile charming but distant. Then his gaze found hers across the crowded room, and held. For a timeless moment, Sophia forgot to breathe. The prince was Daniel. Daniel, the kind, quirky, history-loving delivery man with the surprisingly soft hands and the precise way of speaking, was Prince Alexander of Ethelberg, the man who had shared her cheap sandwiches, who had listened to her dreams, who had made her laugh with his odd pronouncements about pigeons, was the ruler of their nation. He began to walk towards her, a direct, unwavering path through the sea of aristocrats and millionaires. The murmurs around them intensified a confused, curious buzzing. Sophia felt rooted to the spot, her mind reeling a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, disbelief, confusion, a dawning, terrible sense of betrayal, crashing through her. When he reached her, his eyes, Daniel's eyes. Alexander's eyes were filled with a mixture of tenderness, anxiety, and a deep, soul-bearing honesty. "Sophia," he said, his voice low, meant for her alone. Yet somehow it seemed to resonate through the suddenly silent ballroom. "There is something I must tell you, something I should have told you long ago." He took a step back, then addressed the room, his voice now carrying the clear, confident tone of command, yet underscored with an unfamiliar vulnerability. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight I asked Miss Sophia Miller to be my guest. Many of you may not know her. For the past few months, I too have known her under different circumstances." A collective gasp, quickly suppressed, rippled through the crowd. Olivia Prescott's perfectly made-up face was a mask of stunned, then furious disbelief. Her mother looked as though she might faint. "I have been living a double life," Alexander continued, his gaze returning to Sophia, locking with hers. "As a man named Daniel, a delivery worker. I did this because I yearned to find something real, something untouched by my title or my wealth. I wanted to find a connection, a love that was genuine." His voice softened, filled with an undeniable emotion. "Sophia, in you as Daniel, I found a kindness, an honesty, a spirit more valuable than all the treasures in my kingdom. You saw a man, not a prince, and you treated him with a respect and warmth I had almost given up hope of ever finding." He took her hand, then his touch sending a jolt through her. "The man you knew as Daniel is me, Alexander, and the feelings he developed for you, they are very, very real." Sophia stared at him, tears welling in her eyes, blurring his image. The truth so enormous, so world-altering, was too much to absorb. It was a fairy tale, a cruel deception, a beautiful lie all at once. The kindness of Daniel, the quiet understanding, the shared laughter. Had it all been a performance, a prince's elaborate game? You lied to me," she whispered, her voice trembling, the words a raw accusation that cut through the opulent silence. "Every day. You let me believe all." She couldn't finish. The sense of betrayal was a physical ache in her chest, so profound it stole her breath. This wasn't a charming quirk or an endearing eccentricity. This was a monumental deceit. She pulled her hand from his, a sob escaping her lips. The glittering ballroom, the staring faces, his earnest, pleading eyes. It was all a nightmare. She turned and fled, pushing blindly through the stunned guests, the sound of her own heartbroken sobs echoing in her ears, leaving Prince Alexander standing alone in the center of his glittering, suddenly hollow world, the weight of his revelation and her devastation crashing down upon him. The grand ballroom moments before a stage for Prince Alexander's earth-shattering revelation now felt like a vast, echoing chamber of his own making. Sophia's heartbroken flight had torn through the opulent facade, leaving behind a stunned silence that was quickly consumed by a rising tide of hushed, scandalized whispers. Alexander stood a solitary figure amidst the glitter, the weight of his crown, his title, his very identity, pressing down with an almost physical force. Ben was instantly at his side, a hand briefly on his shoulder, a silent offer of support. But what comfort could there be? He had sought truth, and in his clumsy, deceptive pursuit had inflicted a wound far deeper than any he had ever imagined. The days that followed were a blur of royal duty, performed on autopilot, his thoughts a constant agonizing replay of Sophia's tear-streaked face, her whispered accusation, "You lied to me." He had, and the enormity of that lie, no matter how well-intentioned his original quest, now seemed an insurmountable barrier. He'd wanted to find someone who could love the man, not the prince. But in creating Daniel, he had offered a fiction, and Sophia had loved that fiction. Or had she? Had she seen glimpses of Alexander in Daniel, the quiet kindness, the the thoughtful observations, the unexpected depth that he'd hoped was truly him. The questions tormented him. He cancelled all but the most unavoidable state appointments, retreating into a self-imposed isolation within the palace walls. The opulence that had once felt merely stifling now seemed to mock him. He saw Sophia's disappointment in every curated flower arrangement, heard her accusation in the rustle of every silk curtain. He understood with a clarity that seared his soul that he hadn't just broken her trust, he had potentially shattered her belief in genuine connection, the very thing he himself had been so desperate to find. Sophia, meanwhile, had retreated into her own shell. The university, after the initial shock of the prince's revelation, had offered her counseling leave of absence, anything she needed. She accepted none of it, choosing instead to throw herself into her art with a fierce, almost desperate energy. Her small dorm room became her sanctuary and her prison. The beautiful sapphire gown, a reminder of a night that had started with such innocent hope and ended in such devastation, lay crumpled in a box at the back of her closet. She replayed every conversation with Daniel, every shared smile, every moment of easy companionship, now tainted by the knowledge of his true identity. Was any of it real? Or was she merely a pawn in some bored prince's elaborate game? The kindness she'd cherished, the intellect she'd admired, were these just facets of a well-rehearsed performance? Her heart, a stubborn, foolish thing, whispered that Daniel's warmth had been genuine, but her mind, bruised and weary, screamed betrayal. Alexander knew words alone would not be enough. An apology, however sincere, would sound hollow against the backdrop of such a grand deception. He needed to show her, not just tell her that his remorse was real, that his feelings for her, Sophia Miller, were true regardless of who he was. His first step after days of agonizing deliberation was to write her a letter. Not on palace stationery, not with a royal seal, but on simple, unadorned paper, written by his own hand. He didn't make excuses. He laid bare his loneliness, the suffocating weight of his position, the desperate, perhaps foolish hope that had driven him to create Daniel. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, the trust he had broken. He asked for nothing, not even forgiveness, only for a chance someday to speak with her again, to try and explain the man behind both the prince and the persona. He sent it via a trusted, plain-clothed courier with no return address that would betray its origin. He then sought out Mr. Miller, Sophia's father. It took some discreet inquiries to find the modest suburban home of David Miller, a retired school teacher. Alexander went alone, dressed in a simple suit, looking more like a penitent young man than a prince. Mr. Miller, a kind-faced man with Sophia's warm hazel eyes, was understandably wary when Mr. Alexander Ethelberg, he omitted his title, requested a private word. Alexander spoke with a humility he hadn't known he possessed. He explained his unorthodox methods, his deep regret for the deception, and most importantly, his profound and genuine respect and affection for Sophia. "I know I have hurt her terribly, Mr. Miller," Alexander said, his voice heavy with contrition. "And I understand if you or she never want to see me again. But I needed you to know that my feelings for your daughter are sincere. She is extraordinary." David Miller listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. "Sophia is a strong girl, young man," he said finally, "and she has a good heart. But trust once broken is a hard thing to mend. She'll need time." He didn't offer condemnation, nor did he offer false hope, and for that, Alexander was strangely grateful. Meanwhile, in the opulent, venom-filled drawing room of the Prescott residence, Olivia and her mother, Eleanor, were seething. The royal charity ball had been a public humiliation. Not only had Prince Alexander ignored Olivia, but he had elevated that nobody Sophia Miller to a position of astonishing prominence. Their carefully laid plans, their social ambitions had been spectacularly derailed. "This cannot stand," Olivia Mrs. Prescott declared, her voice like ice chips. "That little art student has made fools of us. She must be removed from the equation." Olivia, her pretty face contorted with spite, readily agreed. Her earlier attempt to discredit Sophia had backfired spectacularly due to Alexander's intervention. This time they needed something more permanent, something that would ensure Sophia Miller disappeared from their world and from Prince Alexander's life for good. Mrs. Prescott, through certain less reputable channels, made contact with a man named Marcus, a name whispered in connection with services that operated far outside the law. He was known for his efficiency and his discretion. The instructions were clear: make Sophia Miller's life so unbearable, so frightening, that she would leave Golden Hills, leave the city, perhaps even the country. If intimidation didn't work, Marcus was given to understand that more definitive measures would be acceptable. A substantial sum of money was transferred. Unaware of the new darker storm gathering on her horizon, Sophia finally read Alexander's letter, and then reread it. His words, stripped of princely artifice, resonated with a pain that mirrored her own. She saw not a manipulative royal, but a lonely man who had made a desperate, flawed choice. Her anger hadn't vanished, but beneath it, a flicker of the empathy that was so intrinsic to her nature began to stir. A few days later, a small, unsigned package arrived at her dorm. Inside was a set of professional-grade artists' charcoal sticks and a beautifully bound sketchbook, the kind she'd often admired but could never afford. There was no note, but she knew somehow it was from him. It wasn't a lavish gift, not by princely standards, but it was thoughtful, personal, an acknowledgement of her passion. She found herself walking near the campus fountain that evening, the place where she and Daniel had often talked. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for or what she would say if she saw him. As the twilight deepened, she had the distinct, unsettling feeling of being watched. A shiver traced its way down her spine. She scanned the shadows around the quad, but saw nothing, no one. Dismissing it as nerves, she turned to head back to her dorm. Then, a small folded piece of paper, tucked under the windscreen wiper of a nearby parked car, caught her eye. It seemed out of place. Hesitantly, she picked it up. There was only one word typed in stark block letters: leave. The single stark word, leave, felt like a physical chill against Sophia's skin. The anonymous threat, coupled with the unsettling feeling of being watched, coiled a knot of genuine fear in her stomach. This was no longer about university gossip or social snubs. This felt sinister, a targeted malice she couldn't comprehend. Her first instinct was to dismiss it, to tell herself she was being paranoid. But the memory of Olivia Prescott's venomous glare at the royal ball and her mother's equally cold fury lingered. She didn't tell Alexander immediately. A part of her still recoiled from leaning on his princely power, a stubborn ember of independence refusing to be extinguished. But the fear was a cold companion, and after another night of uneasy dreams and the distinct sense of unseen eyes following her on campus, she knew she couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, Marcus, the man tasked by Eleanor Prescott to handle Sophia, was facing his own crisis of conscience. He was a man who lived by a certain code, albeit one forged in the harsh realities of the city's underbelly. A job was a job, but when the dossier on Sophia Miller landed on his desk, complete with photographs and her daily routines, one small, almost insignificant detail had leapt out at him: her father's name, David Miller. David Miller. The name echoed from a desperate time in Marcus's past, a time when his own mother had been gravely ill, the hospital bills insurmountable. David Miller, a quiet schoolteacher with no connection to their world, had anonymously paid those bills, an act of pure, unasked-for kindness that had saved his mother's life and given Marcus a sliver of hope when he had none. Marcus had eventually found out who his benefactor was, but Mr. Miller had humbly refused any form of repayment, saying only that kindness was its own reward. To harm the daughter of David Miller, it was unthinkable. The debt he owed was not one that could be erased by any sum Eleanor Prescott could offer. His decision was swift. He gathered the evidence of Mrs. Prescott's illicit contract, encrypted messages, payment transfers, and made a call not to his usual contacts, but to a secure, unlisted number that connected to Prince Alexander's most trusted aide. He laid out the entire plot, his voice flat professional, but with an underlying current of grim respect for the man whose past kindness was now unknowingly protecting his child. Tell His Highness, Marcus concluded, that Sophia Miller will not be harmed, and that Eleanor Prescott has made a grave miscalculation. Alexander received the news with a cold fury that settled deep in his bones. That Olivia and her mother would stoop to such levels to actively plot harm against Sophia was beyond even his cynical expectations of their character. He moved with the decisive speed of a ruler whose most precious treasure was threatened. The evidence Marcus provided was irrefutable. Within hours, uniformed officers accompanied by stoic members of the Royal Guard arrived at the Prescott mansion. Eleanor and Olivia were in the midst of planning a small, celebratory tea for when they would hear news of Sophia's departure. The sight of the authorities at their door, the cold presentation of a warrant citing conspiracy and endangerment, shattered their arrogant composure. Their protests, their indignant cries of innocence and connections to high places were met with impassive efficiency. They were escorted out, their faces pale with shock and dawning terror, as a few discreetly positioned news cameras captured their downfall for the morning papers. Justice, when wielded by a determined prince, could indeed be swift. Alexander went to Sophia immediately, not as a prince making a grand gesture, but as a man deeply concerned for the woman he loved. He found her shaken by the recent threat on the verge of confiding in him. He gently told her what had transpired about the Prescott's plot and about Marcus's unexpected intervention, an intervention rooted in her own father's past act of grace. Sophia listened, her eyes wide, a complex tapestry of emotions playing across her face. Fear, relief, and a dawning understanding of the interconnectedness of actions of kindness given and returned. When Alexander finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at him, truly looked at him, and the last vestiges of her anger, her hurt, seemed to melt away, replaced by a profound, weary clarity. "Your world, Alexander," she said softly, "is so much more complicated than I ever imagined." "It doesn't have to be yours, Sophia," he replied, his voice earnest. "Not unless you want it to be. My deception was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back the trust I broke. But my feelings for you, what I found with you as Daniel, that was the realest thing in my life." And in that moment, seeing the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the genuine remorse, and knowing the lengths he had gone to protect her, Sophia finally allowed her heart to make its choice. The forgiveness she offered wasn't a sudden absolution, but a quiet, steady opening, a willingness to believe again, to build something new and true from the wreckage of secrets and lies. It was, as Alexander had hoped, an earned forgiveness. Their wedding a few months later was not the ostentatious state affair many had expected. It was a smaller, more intimate ceremony, held in the palace's private chapel, attended by close family and friends, including a quietly beaming Ben who delivered a best man speech that was both hilariously inappropriate and deeply moving, and a grateful stoic Mr. Miller who walked his daughter down the aisle with quiet pride. Marcus, at Alexander's discreet invitation, watched from a shadowed alcove, a silent witness to the kindness that had come full circle. Alexander, in his vows, spoke not of kingdoms or crowns, but of honesty of second chances, and of a love found in the most unexpected of disguises. Sophia, radiant in a gown as simple and elegant as her spirit, spoke of trust rebuilt, and of seeing the true man beneath the royal trappings. Life for Alexander and Sophia was not a simple happily ever after. The scars of his deception took time to fully fade, and navigating the complexities of royal life together brought its own set of challenges. But their love, forged in truth and tested by adversity, was a resilient and powerful force. Alexander, with Sophia by his side, ruled with a newfound empathy, his brief sojourn as Daniel having taught him lessons no royal tutor ever could. Sophia, while embracing her new role with grace, never lost her connection to the simpler world she came from. She championed arts education for underprivileged children, her quiet efforts making a tangible difference, proving that true nobility lay not in birth, but in the heart. They found their peace not in the absence of trials, but in facing them together, their hands clasped their future, a testament to a love that was finally undeniably real. It was an earned peace, hard-won, and deeply cherished, a quiet melody, composed in the heart of a bustling, often complicated world. And so Prince Alexander and Sophia found their hard-won peace, a testament that real love often asks us to look beyond the surface, to forgive deeply, and to build trust step by painstaking step. Isn't it true that in our own search for genuine connection, we sometimes find ourselves navigating through illusions, hoping to discover something truly authentic? Their journey, with all its deceptions and ultimate triumphs of the heart, has definitely given us a lot to think about. What do you believe was the most crucial moment or action that led to Sophia truly forgiving Alexander? We'd love to read your perspective on their path to earned forgiveness. And as we continue to bring you these stories, your feedback is incredibly important. If you have any thoughts on today's tale or ideas for how we can make future stories even more compelling, please share them in the comments below. If their story touched your heart, a like would mean the world, and if you know someone who might find inspiration or solace in this journey, please share it with them. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on our explorations of love, truth, and the human spirit. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may your own stories be filled with courage and genuine connection.